Welcome to Life, Language, and Lyrics with me, Laina, where you can listen to conversations that I have with some of the most interesting people I know. Thank you for stopping through. Now let's get into this episode. Welcome to another episode of Life, Language, and Lyrics with Laina. And today we're going to be talking about Black voices in neurogenic communication disorders. Some of you who listen may know that I am a speech language pathologist, and I focused a lot on brain injury, specifically traumatic brain injury or sports concussion. And so because this episode is airing during Brain Injury Awareness Month, I wanted to invite someone who is a major in the field to me, Dr. Charles Ellis, who is a professor and department chair of the Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences Department at the University of Florida. His academic concentration focuses on adult neurogenic disorders, and he teaches courses related to aphasia and adult neurogenic disorders. And his research is designed to understand outcomes that are associated with adult neurologically based disorders of communication and factors that contribute to the lack of equity in service and provision, and outcome disparities that exist among African Americans and other underrepresented minority groups. And Dr. Ellis also has a host of peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters that are related to neurological disorders and health disparities and minority health issues, and has actually been a huge influence in the work that I do now. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Okay, so first, I'm just I gave a little intro about you, but maybe you can tell us anything that I left off, or even like how you even came to the profession and getting your PhD.
Yeah, I don't think you left anything off, but it is kind of an interesting story that I kind of on a dare with some of my friends decided to go to University of Georgia, and like a lot of kids at that age, I didn't really know, what I wanted to major in or what I wanted my profession to be. I mean, at that age, I understood that there were doctors, lawyers, and teachers, and I probably didn't know much beyond that. And even though I was, capable and smart enough to get in the university, I spent a lot of time just taking classes. And I remember once meeting with an advisor, and I think had changed my major like 7 times. Over 3 years, and I was like a 4th-year junior. Like I'd been there 4 years, but I wasn't really close to graduating with any kind of degree. So she had recommended that I go over and talk to some of the folks in the speech department. Mm-hmm. So they have some interesting majors, and I went there and I met a guy, Richard Peach, who's just retired from Rush University, and he talked a lot about what he did, and was really one of the first people to explain to me the importance of diversity. So this would have been in 89 or 90, and that what he saw in the field, what he thought the field needed, and that this would be a great opportunity. And he invested a lot in me, and the rest is kind of history. I am certain he helped me get into graduate school at UGA because my poor little transcript was all over the place with all kinds of courses, but he helped guide me getting a master's degree. And then I practiced for 10 years, and I stayed in touch with him. And we always talked about going back for a PhD, and I'd have a plan and something would come up. And in the 10th year, I called him and said, this is going to sound very bizarre. I have a 2-year-old, but I think this is the time for me to go back to school. He said, no, I believe you. Here are the 3 schools. I know you're not going to leave the South, so you're going to go to the University of Florida. And that was really the extent of the discussion. Wow. And he made some calls and helped make sure that I got funding and all the important things. Mm-hmm. And then the rest was kind of history. So it just was good mentorship and good guidance. And if I had it to do over again, I would hope that he would recommend the same thing.
Oh, that's really nice. I didn't know that. I've seen you guys on publications together, but I didn't realize that he kind of guided you into the profession.
Yeah, so he was early on, a mentor. Now I just consider him he's always a mentor. I always ask him about important career decisions, but he's more of just a great friend. Now, a person I like to hang out with, do fun things. And Chicago, my favorite city, except for in the winter. Just a great guy. And I should say, we've had this debate on whether or not I actually took his class first or his wife's class, Patty McCarthy, who's a audiologist. So they both, it was kind of a family influence on me. And I still talk to them regularly and try my best to get to Chicago every chance I can.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, you can tell he's retired because at the last ANCDS, he had like the button-down shirt, but it was like open a little bit, like he's been hanging out in Florida.
Yeah. And he's originally from Florida. So
Oh,
part of he really understood how things were working at the University of Florida at the time. And it was the best advice that he could have given me.
okay, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. All right, so now we're at the life section. So I'm going to ask you some more things that are more specific to the work that you've been doing. And so this is probably maybe a heavy question to start off with, but what do you think has been the primary challenges for Black clients and other racially diverse clients with neurologically based communication disorders from kind of like where you've seen starting in the profession up to now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think clients, regardless of their background, there's some things that they struggle with, and that I'm not sure that we do a good job as clinicians of seeing them as people. And people are complicated, and they have complicated lives, and they have complicated families. They have crazy families. They have supportive families. And I think a lot of that is it's magnified for people of color. And the reason I say that is in a lot of the neurological conditions that I work with, there's a big age difference. So, for example, in stroke, when you look at any stroke study, the Blacks, the African Americans in the study are going to be 8 to 10 years younger than the whites. So they're at very different life stages. And so if you have kind of this one size fits all, then you're not carefully considering the impact of a condition like that on people that are of different ages. So if you have a stroke at 65, you are near retirement, you've had your peak earnings, you've made your money to retire, you've made your money to take care of your grandkids and probably their kids. And for many, you've accumulated enough wealth, and it's not always about money, but you've accumulated enough that you can affect future generations. When you have a stroke at 45 or 50, you're not able to do that. So it disrupts not only your immediate family, it affects future generations of the things that you could have potentially accomplished, and or the role that you could have played. Let's say you didn't earn a lot of money, but you were destined to be a great granddad. So now there's a generation of kids that they don't get that opportunity. I think in the same way, clinicians, when you don't view it that way, and you view all clients the same, there's a focus on equality. And I think that is a bit tricky, because when you're talking about health and disease, I don't want equality, I want equity. And that's something very different. Right. Equality just means everyone gets the same. If I'm 45 with a stroke, I need something different than someone who's 60. Yeah. So I need a clinician that thinks through an equitable lens, because I need to, or the client needs to optimize their ability for themselves and for their families. And so I think that gets missed sometimes. And because we're different and we come from different cultural backgrounds, even some of our thoughts can be devastating. And I have seen where a client who is a person of color is determined to be non-compliant, but the same client who's white is considered depressed, but they have the exact same symptomology. And probably for both of them, if someone were in tune with the fact that we do need to consider compliance, but we also need to consider depression, and we need to consider the factors that might allow a person with a condition to derail their own outcome. And that does happen. Like, we don't want to blame the clients, but sometimes they do make decisions that are not helpful to them in the long run. And then when you add in family dynamics of the folks who do all the talking, but they aren't going to do anything when the person goes home, and those who are quiet, but they're going to have to do all the work. We don't always see those dynamics in families. What we see is we see families through our own lens, and that is very much in error. And I actually had to learn that. So I have 5 sisters and no brothers, and I have seen how they rally, of how they organize themselves. 2 of my sisters are nurses, so anything medical, you better get that right, or you're going to have trouble. And they all bring something different to the table. And I guess I kind of thought, well, that's how all families work. But you find out very quickly that they don't. So you have to see a lot of this through different lens, and it has to be a learning process as well, that you constantly have to evolve as a clinician or a health professional, so that you can really help a very diverse group of people achieve their best outcomes. So I think it's a very complicated formula, and then in this focus on evidence base, many times that's translated as everybody gets the same, and it's not. It's grounding how you practice in the best evidence, and then evidence doesn't apply equally to all groups. We've learned that through blood pressure medications, that there are different classes that work better for certain patient groups than they do others. And you have medications that we use off the label, and they have a different kind of outcomes. So when clinicians are maybe too focused, the person gets lost. So it becomes the patient or the client, and no one's thinking about the person. So that's a long-winded answer to say that and people have always said this medicine is more of an art than a science. I think our field is just like that. That people are complicated, and then when you add a communication problem, which drives a lot of our independence, then it can have a traumatic impact on their lives and generations after them.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good response. You made me think about a couple of few points that you made. The first one about just thinking about the different needs at different ages. Because I try to talk to my students a lot about participation restrictions, and really getting to understand your actual client and what they actually need. But I hadn't really thought about that idea of, if I'm 45 and I have a stroke and I'm going to have grandchildren, how that changes the family dynamics, or how that affects them in the future. And then the other there was something else you said. I'm trying to remember now what it was. About the labels, compliance versus the depression, because we see this a lot. We talk about it a lot with children. One of my colleagues, Dr. Shamika Stewart, always talks about transformative language and how the terminologies that you use when you write your reports can impact them as they move along in the future. But we don't always think about that as much with adults, and how that is perceived when they read their reports. So gave us a lot to think about.
Yeah, and people bring a lot to the table, and clinicians do too. So you're almost bringing two forces together that are not aligned, and sometimes they don't know that they need to align to achieve the best outcomes. And so the client may be bringing the current issues related to this neurological impairment, but they're also bringing a lot of history with them as well. History with people, history with healthcare systems, histories and understanding of health. So beliefs and attitudes do matter in health-related outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm gonna ask you a little more about yourself in the profession. How would you describe your role in the profession over the years, particularly as a Black speech language pathologist, and being able to like address health disparities? And I know you talk a lot about, I've heard you do talks on economics in healthcare. So how would you describe your role or your impact? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's evolved over time. When I started, I think I just wanted to go through the ranks and probably find something like aphasia that I was interested in and I could write on and go to meetings and that sort of thing. But then I realized over time that I think there was a different role of addressing some areas that were not being addressed in our field, not addressed in healthcare, and understanding really responsibility that I have to the profession and to my family. And I know those two things don't seem linked, but they are. The number of times that people say, "Hey, I'm just glad to see someone who looks like me," seems very weird to me early in my career, and sometimes it still gives me a odd kind of feeling of because hey, I'm just me. I'm not anybody of any importance, but to hear that and to give talks that resonate with people. I also think that sometimes we have a job, and the job has a calling to it. That part of why I'm supposed to do this, I believe, is for people who didn't get a chance to, or that people who can't. I think that the things have always fell in place for me in ways that I didn't understand as a younger person, a younger man especially. I just focused on all the challenges in front of me, and I didn't realize that. And you hear people say that I was winning all the time, but I couldn't focus on the winning. And so the disparities kind of aligns for me, being from South Georgia and coming from a family with a lot of health challenges. So I most of from 5 until I was in my 30s, I was raised by my mom and my stepdad. And I had a biological dad there that he was complicated just like I am. And the more I learned about him, we're like one of just how we think about things, how we do things. And so I didn't fully understand what I had gotten from him. But what I struggled with is that he died when he was 45 years old. And his dad died when he was 45 years old, the best that I can understand. And my mom's dad died when he was 45. So I have this huge void of people, men in my life who really made me, but they never got a chance to see the product. I wouldn't say the final product, but they didn't really get to see any of the product. So my grandfathers were deceased before I was born. My dad died when I was in college, and my stepdad died a couple of years ago. and none of them got to see kind of what they built. My mom died when she was 51 and I was 31. So she didn't get to see all the work she put in.
Yeah.
My great aunt, she didn't get to see all the work she put in. The only person was my biological grandmother, Emma Ellis Randall. So she got to see it. She got to come to my graduation, and then because she lived to be 96.
Oh,
So
wow.
she got a chance in her 70s and 80s as a very mature person to see this man that had a lot of flaws, and she got to work on that as a very experienced person and to build trust in me to say, no, you're going to do these things for these reasons. And that was always the message, but she kind of, before she left, she was able to really get me to see kind of the how and the why of why you need to do this stuff, why you need to talk about these things, why you need to be a better person. That was her thing. I just want you to be a good man. Like, I don't care about the university, but I want you to be a good man. And don't mess up my name. She would say that all the time. And I would promise her I wouldn't. So I think that's a lot of what drives me. It's not about me. I think I have a big responsibility to my family, especially those who didn't get to see this person that's on this podcast. Those that got to see just a part of it. And so a lot of this, I have to do this for them. This is not about me or my profession. It's about really giving back to generations of people that put something into me that even I'm still unraveling and trying to understand. So I hope that's what you were. So a lot of this is not about, it's not about science really for me.
Yeah.
It's about doing the things that they would want me to do, demand of me to do for marginalized people. I think that's what they would expect out of me. And I hear their voices sometimes when I'm coming into work and I know I'm getting ready to go off on someone about something, that I will hear that voice that says, you're right, but let's don't say it that way today. Let's do it like this. So, I'm still connected to them. They may not be here, but I'm very much connected to them.
That's nice. Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to know, do you, out of all of the articles that you've done a ton, are there any few that really stand out to you or were kind of like passion paper, or like one you were just extremely proud of?
Yeah, in 2009, one of my early papers, and it was just a viewpoint of, does race matter? And I remember I had asked someone, do you think this can be published before so we weren't talking about disparities and equity. And the person said, yeah, if you write it, like, you're going to have to do it. And I asked them, like, well, what do you mean? And they said, yeah, well, I think you're the only voice that can write it right now. It was a hard paper to get published because at that time, people weren't really interested in believing that there might be any kind of disparity that wasn't just biologic, that we didn't think about social determinants and all these other challenges. And I knew they existed because I had lived with them. And so it was a hard paper to write, but it's paper that cited a lot of disparities work. And so when it got to I'll be very honest, when it got to the third revision, I called the editor, and I don't advise any young person to do this. I said, hey, listen, I want to know, is this paper going to get published? Because I don't want to do this again. And everything that I'm reading in the reviews says that it's not. So I don't want to waste any more time on it. And the editor convinced me that, yeah, this is going to be a challenge, but no, you need to stick with it, and it's going to get published. So I think, and I've had other papers that were rejected and then they published later, but that was a different one, because when I wrote that, I don't even know if I was writing about aphasia or speech pathology.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was writing about South Georgia and what I knew about South Georgia and disparities where I'm from. So that paper says one thing, but it was really talking about something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you said 2009, I already knew which paper you were talking about. Because that paper for me was extremely impactful. I remember being in my doc program and doing research into anything related to race and neurogenics. And that paper has stuck with me this whole, I think it's a little over a decade now.
Yeah.
And even my most recent paper, I cited you quite a bit because I did a very crude reanalysis just based on sports concussion. And we also, I don't know if you got a chance to see the talk that the READY Committee, Race, Equity, Diversity Committee for ANCDS did this past year. But we only had like one slide, and it was a slide of the table from that 2009 article showing the limited number of articles. And then we went through based on the different areas. So aphasia, dementia, TBI, motor speech disorders, and tried to look for the same things. And the numbers hadn't changed much. The numbers hadn't changed much. And I think that was a big eye opener because we did it as an engaging type of discussion. And so the people in the audience had to talk about it. So that was really interesting. But yeah, that paper has driven me.
I got a lot of mileage out of that one for sure.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, wonderful. So now we are at the section of language where I'll ask you sometimes some things related to advice or anything that has to do with communication in some form. And so what I wanted to ask you, which also could possibly be another kind of complex question, is what are the conversations that you think need to happen in our profession or even outside of it to eliminate health disparities as much as we can?
Yeah, I think the conversations have to align around the facts that we know, that these disparities are real, and there's wide-ranging factors that drive them. We oftentimes get hung up on terminology. We can get hung up on terminology around race. Is it African American? Is it Black? Is it non-Hispanic Black? Is it people of color? Is it BIPOC? We get so paralyzed by some of the terminology that creates discomfort that we can't have the real conversation that basically says people are different, they're highly variable, people make good and bad choices related to health, and it's the complexity of all of that that drives outcomes, along with systems that are just not designed for equity for all. And we have a hard time with that concept. So the concepts of structural barriers, we won't even say structural racism, but structural barriers. We have a hard time accepting or believing that people don't have equal access when we know people don't have equal access. You can live near a facility and still not have access.
Right.
Or people make choices based on history of discrimination, of racism, that they don't access top health centers that are right next to them. So we have a hard time accepting a lot of things that are factual, that have been proven in the literature, and then trying to figure out a solution, whether it's in health systems or in academics. It's the same problem in programs. When we try to talk about diversity, We can't even stay on topic long enough because it becomes uncomfortable. So if someone is talking about racial ethnic diversity, then a lot of the conversations go quickly to diversity of thought and diversity of this. And so there's never a clear discussion on one. We don't align enough on a core concept to try to figure some of this out. And we want to deduce it down to something simple, and none of these issues are simple.
That's very true. I think you bring up a lot of good points with that one. What advice would you give? And you've given me some advice over the years, but what advice would you give to diverse researchers and clinicians coming up in the field as we move forward?
You have to write, and it's going to hurt. You got to go to the well of peer review, and you got to go often. And sometimes you're going to get water, sometimes you're going to get dirt, you're going to get mud, you're going to get attitude, you're going to get people challenging your intelligence, your integrity, your common sense, but you have to keep coming back. That someone told me once, it's not research until it's in print, that conferences don't even matter. Now, I don't know if I'm that extreme, because I like to go to some conferences. I'm not a big conference person, but I do think you have to get the stuff in print, because some folks won't believe it until it goes through the peer review process. So that's one thing that I would suggest. And I think the other is you've got to develop a thick skin, and you've got to invest time in understanding the barriers for women in academia, the barriers for people of color, and not make a lot of those same mistakes. A lot of it is the evidence shows what happens. Things like black tax, that's a real thing that you have to understand, that you want to take on all these, but you also have a career that's operating parallel with your job and your career. Your department can't get you promoted. It's your own corporation. Someone told me this, I gave mine a name. It's the Ellis Institute. So the Ellis Institute, I always have my eyes on my corporation, and that's my science. But I also want to be a good citizen in my department. But ultimately, when you're trying to go through the ranks, the department is evaluating your corporation's performance, how you did in writing, how you did in teaching. And that's about you. So you've got to keep your eyes on those and be a good citizen in a department all at the same time, while evaluating the barriers that we know hold women and people of color back.
Thank you for that. True statements. And I'm also taking that in as well. Okay. So now we're at the last section, which is the lyrics. So not necessarily super connected to the topic at hand, but it lets us learn a little bit more about you as a person. And so I wanted you to tell me a song or song lyrics that have lifted you when things have been difficult.
Yeah. So I should tell you this, in the 7th grade. That was a difficult summer. My mom taught me to cook and do my sister's hair and all these other things. And she also got me a job, even though I was not looking for one. That job ended up being one of the best things for me. It was at a hardware store with a Radio Shack inside. I don't even think Radio Shack exists anymore. So there was always music playing all the time. So I kind of have a broad appreciation for music. I have classical music on my phone. I have rap, R&B, I have all kinds of stuff. But I was a young man in the 80s and 90s. So I'm definitely of the rap generation. And there's a song by Tupac Shakur that he now a lot of this I don't listen to as a middle-aged man because some of the content is very he had a very different style of explaining
Yeah.
things. But when you got down to the core of what he was talking about, some of it resonated. And there's a song I listen to it probably once a week, and it's called "When My Homies Call." And in that song, this is the part, and I wrote this down. He said, we both had dreams of being great. And he's talking about his, a close friend. He said, but his deferred and blurred and changed in shape. It's fate. It wasn't my choice to make. To be great, I'm giving it all it takes. And so when I'm down, I have to make the decision that I have to give it all that it takes to be great. My aunt told me as a little boy that's what she wanted me to try to be great. You're probably not going to be great, but if you try to be great, you'll probably end up being pretty good at something, and I'm going to be happy with that. So those lyrics just resonate with what she was asking me to do. The same thing my grandmother asked me to do. Like they're not wanting me to, be a famous person, or it's not about greatness, but you can't achieve goodness sometimes without looking further to greatness.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm just a regular person trying to put in work. But that's what they want from me. So I'm going to try to give it to them.
I like that. I like that. Tupac was a poet.
Was.
He was a poet. I love that. Okay. And the other one, so we'll just go the opposite end of the spectrum. What song best represents you when you are at your best?
When I'm at my best, that's a good one. When I'm at my best, it's probably something that's instrumental. And I have a number of songs that I listen to, and they're just beats or pianos, because when I'm at my best, I'm doing the things that I need to do. I'm doing them efficiently without a lot of noise and a lot of fanfare, and I'm having the impact I think I'm supposed to have. So I wouldn't say that I have a specific instrumental. Moments of Love is one. Art of Noise, that's one that when I hear it, I always feel like I'm in a good place. But I think anything instrumental.
Okay. I love that. Yeah, I listen to a lot of instrumental when I'm trying to write.
Yeah.
It helps me to focus in. All right. This is great. Dr. Ellis, you gave such good information, things for us to think about in the profession. I think this was a great addition to touching on Brain Injury Awareness Month and being able to also talk about health disparities. And also, I just appreciate so much that you gave me some of your time, because I know that your time is packed and valuable. So I appreciate that.
Everybody's is packed and valuable.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining.
All right. Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed this episode with Dr. Ellis and talking about health disparities and issues of race in the area of neurogenic communication disorders. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, so if you want to learn more, please follow me at overallneuro_Dr. D. See you on the next one.